I did this wrong. I did this wrong, and I'm gonna have to understand what I did wrong. Hello, my name is Pablo. This over here is Milo, who you can see is sleeping very tightly. Today we're gonna do a weird thing. Someone from the YouTube channel basically sent me some reference of a shader that they want to make. So they sent me that, and they sent me some assets that they have, and they want to see if I can make the shader work the way they want, because they've tried it many times and apparently they have some problems. So hopefully I can sort it out for them, and also in the process you might learn something and I might have some fun making a shader. Ta-da! The Sims! So this is a reference they sent me. Basically, they want this shader from the Sims Switch. It's similar to other stuff I've done before, where you have like the Fresnel as the outline for the ghost. But also, you can see that it has transparency, you can see here in the legs, and also it fades out on the bottom. And also they told me that the assets they sent me, although you can see in these characters the albedo, so the actual textures don't have a lot of... I don't see any alpha on them, like, you know, like tethered cloth or things like that on the albedo. They told me that they had a lot of trouble getting the alpha to work with the alpha from the albedo that they have. So in the asset they send me, we can expect that there will be some combination of that. So some things we can see already. So yeah, we have the Fresnel, but you can see, for example, here the shirt is preserving some of the texture, so maybe we'll have to do that. And then we also have the faded legs. That seems to be pretty universal. And there's also some, like a little bit of darkness towards the center. So basically the Fresnel makes bright, and then there's like a little bit of a dark fill here. It's not just see-through, because you can see this kind of goes dark and you can barely see there. So okay, so we learned a few things. It is pretty see-through in general. You can see it's just alpha. It's not doing any sort of distortion or anything. So shouldn't be too hard. I do wonder where they kind of run into issues, because they said they tried many things to make it work with the assets they have. So maybe once we start with those assets, we'll find where the pithole is. Pithole? Pitfall. Okay, so now we're taking a look at the assets here. See the model. Okay, so the model is a character that's just standing. There are some weird areas over here. Let me drop it right here. Not super sure what's happening in those areas over there, but you know, should be fine. And then they send me this texture. Oh, I see. You know, when I saw this on like just Windows Explorer, I didn't actually like it. It showed all transparency, so I was very confused about how this worked. But you can see this is what I saw before, and I was like, "What is that? Like a Rorschach test?" But now I get how this maps to this. Okay, so let's start on the place we always start. Basically, an empty shader. The first thing we want to get is the texture in, so we're just gonna call this main text, drop it in here, and then basically pull it to a sample texture 2D, and we want to put the RGB of that into the fragment. Now we already know we're going to need alpha, so we might as well also do that as well. So in the graph settings, we can go over here, just change this from opaque to transparent, and that adds the alpha. For now I'm going to leave it to 1 just so that we can start seeing what this looks like. So let's look at this material, properties here, and let's hook up their shadows. Okay, so this area, I'm guessing this is mapped to this holes over here, which just means that they don't have any texture there, which, you know, might look wrong, but it's fine because they might have 0 alpha there, so you might not even notice. So how do we check that? Well, we go in here and we hook up the alpha to the alpha, we save it, and there we go. There's our ghost. So basically we got like the starting part of it. Now we need to add Fresnel to kind of add like the little sort of more outline to them, and then make sure that the Fresnel doesn't collide with the alpha that they put in their texture, which is basically what they were saying they were having a lot of trouble with. So let's grab over here, let's add node, and let's look for Fresnel. And then for the power, over here we can just add a little variable, and we call it Fresnel power. And I'm gonna make it as a slider just so that it's easier to mess around with. By default, I'm going to set it to 1, and I'm going to give it a range from 0 to 5. Okay, so now I can basically go in here and then actually let's see it on its own, just so that we get an idea of what it looks like. So if I disconnect this and I disconnect this and I just connect the Fresnel to the alpha, and this is just so that we can see. So you can see like we get like an outline of the mesh now because of the Fresnel. And the way Fresnel works basically is it grabs each little vertex on the mesh has a normal, which is basically in which direction it's looking at. Then it compares it with the normal from the camera, and it just does like what's called a dot product to check if they're looking in the same direction or opposite directions, or if they're perpendicular. If you look here, because this vertex is kind of pointing up and my camera is pointing forward, the dot product tells me that we are almost perpendicular to it. So that's why those are the ones that draw. What you'll find is that then basically Fresnel works really well for shapes like this that are very sort of like softly round. But if you try and use it in something with like very steep angles like a cube, it won't work at all. So you want to be you want to know when Fresnel is a good use, which is in this case it's definitely a useful case. Okay, so now let's mix this with their texture. So we can hook this back up, and then we can over here go here and then just add. And then we're going to add the 2 opacities. So basically we're going to get the result of that. Now, the problem with just adding right now is that, for example, if there's a part of the texture that has alpha of 1, and then the Fresnel also has alpha of 1, you end up with alpha of 2. And you don't really want to go above that. So for that, we can just use what's called a saturate, which is basically it's just clamping a value between 0 and 1. So this will combine the 2. There you go. So now you can see we get the outline here, and actually I guess one nice thing we could add over here is a little node in between, maybe like a multiply, and I can add float and call it Fresnel visibility. And then I can hook up this one here, and that will allow us to fade in the Fresnel in and out as we wish. This kind of gives you a little bit more control in your shader. So let's change this to a slider, and let's give it the default of 0 to 1. Yeah, and by default let's make it 1. So if I save this, nothing changed right now because I made it 1, but now I have this slider, and you can see this is what it looks like with no Fresnel, and this is what it looks with full Fresnel. So what is the problem now? Well, the problem is now those parts of the asset that were white, now they are a problem. So we definitely have to address this. Look at our texture here. You can press Ctrl and then click on it, and it will show you like a detailed version of it that you can actually kind of study. And you can see if I go to the red channel, it has full red on this areas over here, full green, full blue. Now the alpha itself doesn't have those areas. Now why is this? Depending on the program that you use to export, we run this into a lot of work with Photoshop. If you export in Photoshop an image and there's no alpha in an area, it's hard to predict what color we will put behind it. Now, how do we fix it? So at work, we actually use a plugin for Photoshop called Super PNG that gives you very fine control over what each channel will export. In Unity itself, there's an asset called Channel Mixer that is pretty good for that sort of stuff. You can actually tell it like what to put on each one of the channels. So in this case, for example, you could just grab the original image you have. Like you can see the alpha channel has everything we need. You could put that alpha channel into all 4 channels. The program I personally use just for like personal work is called Affinity Photo, and literally the fix is going to be loading it up, making some change, and then just saving it back again, and that'll just fix it. I know that's not a very satisfactory fix, but that's literally how we're gonna fix this. Okay, so this is what it looks like in Affinity Photo. As you can see, there's alpha all over here, and if I check the channels, you can see this is the red, the green, and the blue. I can add, for example, here an empty layer. Literally that won't alter it in any way. And then when I save, I just tell it save flattened. So after refresh, you can see the squares are gone, and now all the channels are fine, and we don't have this crazy little white thing over here. So that was just a matter of basically fixing the asset itself, and you might encounter this problem, especially I found it quite a bit when using Photoshop. So now we have the combination of the alpha from their texture and the alpha from the Fresnel. So that is basically half the battle. Now the next thing they wanted is, if we look at the reference again, we look at the reference, the legs are kind of faded out on the bottom, right? So they just kind of have like this little faded aspect on the bottom. So we'll add something to, based on the Y position, fade it out towards the bottom. One of the things they did send me, because they also wanted this as reference, was Fatal Frame. They sent me this as reference, and I was like, okay, well, this two, you might not think it, but the two are so different in terms of complexity. I actually consulted with Steve a little bit about how this is done, because this is way more complicated, because you can see as the thing moves around, you'll see it does like a little bit of a distortion on the shape, but it doesn't do it on the water. So, and it's a very 2D looking distortion too. Yeah, like here, you can see it has like this ghost. Yeah, that distortion looks very, very 2D distortion. I don't know how to explain like the difference between 2D distortion, but essentially when you do 3D distortion, you can only move vertices around. So, especially in a game from this era, you would actually notice, because obviously if you have two vertices like this, you move this one, it's still a straight line there, right? So it actually looks very, like you can see the polygons as the distortion happens. This one looks like it's a distortion on pixels, which you can do on a texture, and in a texture it's way smoother because basically each pixel can be deformed differently. You can also see, well, it's a ghost, but you can also see like ghosting, as in there's two copies of the silhouette there. So there's a lot going on in this shader. How do you do the distortion on this without distorting the background if it's a pixel distortion? Because a pixel distortion, you can do a pixel distortion within geometry only. So that means I could distort the texture inside the arm, but I cannot distort the arm itself unless I do it in a post effect. And if I do a post effect, I'm also going to distort the water behind them. So how do I do that? So he's thought, and it's kind of what I thought at first too, but I couldn't figure out how they solved another part, which he did figure out. What I thought is basically they render the scene first, and they render what's called a depth buffer for that. And the depth buffer is just saying how close things are. So they render the scene, the depth buffer, then they render the ghost and a depth buffer for that one, and then they combine both using those depth buffers. What I didn't think about was the depth buffer, because I was like, okay, I can render this to a texture and then do all the deformation and stuff. I can do that, but then how do I solve this part where he hugs her? Because there's a part here where they come in contact, that part. You know, when they're touching each other. I was like, how do you do that if it's like a separate render texture? But you do that apparently with the depth, which makes a lot of sense. Once he told me about that, some graphics people are wizard. That's actually exactly what I told them, because I tried to Google it first. There's no way to Google this. You just kind of have to know, you know, like how do you Google this? You know, there's no real like search that you can do. So it does feel very much like it's arcane knowledge that only graphics programmers that have been doing it for a while, they already have the knowledge so they can distribute it. A lot of times, like honestly, like you're just hoping that there will be like a GDC talk or something. How make good effects? Yeah, that's the search I could have done. Maybe I'll try to do the composite thing at some point, but it's definitely well beyond my current graphics programmer's skills. You know, I looked for Fatal Frame effects, breakdown, and things like that. I didn't find one. Like, how do you look for depth buffer composite thing? Like, by the time you're looking for depth buffer composite thing, you already know how it works, right? So you have to like know how it works before you can Google how it works. So it's that's the part that I felt like it was like, you just have to ask a wise man, which fortunately I have a patient wise man in my life that can help me learn some of those things with the knowledge accumulated over a very successful career. Okay, anyways, back to this thing. So we're gonna do the fading of the legs next. A very good point is that basically the way we're gonna do it right now is based on the Y position inside the object. But what that means is basically if you were to do an animation where this character bends over, then for example the hands would fade as they get closer to the floor. Now, to avoid that, you generally would want to do a second UV mapping that goes from the bottom to the top and just kind of keep the vertices there, or a secondary texture based on the UVs that does it. Either like second UV coordinates or a second map that you use for this. We're not going to make a full asset right now, so we're just going to use the object coordinates, but you can switch it to a UV map as you see. So for that, we're going to use a node here called position. And position can have different versions. It starts by default on world coordinates. That means that if we tie the fade to this, depending where you're standing in the world, you would fade. We don't want this in this case, so we want the object version, which is like within the object are coordinates. So just to preview, this is not actually going to stay like this. I just want to preview a little bit of how the Y affects the Y's on the object. So I'm going to hook the Y of the position directly to alpha. So you can see actually it did a kind of interesting thing. So it seems like Y0 is right here. We don't want the fade to start here, we want the fade to start over here. So we already know that we're gonna have to move it down a little bit, and then we're gonna have to kind of grow it. So for that we can easily use a node that's called a remap. So in the remap, basically we're gonna say, okay, what's our original range? Let's say -1 to 1, and we're gonna want to remap this to 0 to 1. We're probably gonna have to tweak this a little bit, but you'll see in a moment. So once I save this, now the fade is on the bottom. So basically what used to be 0 here and -1 here and 1 here now starts from 0 here and up to the start. And what I can do here now is if I want to adjust like the point that the fade starts and maybe the point of the strength, or maybe the strength of the fade, I can also adjust from here outward. So how we do that is basically we make another node, which I'm going to make this. Do I make this a smooth step or do I make this a remap? I think I'm gonna make a second. Now you don't need to make a second remap. You can make it in the same remap, but I feel a little more comfortable doing a second remap just so that it's easier to read later, because otherwise I'm going to come back here and I'm going to look at why did I go from -1 to 1 into 2 variables. It's going to be like a little confusing. So I think just for the sake of making it more readable, then I'm going to do it in 2 steps. And this one I'm going to remap from 0 to 1 into values that I'm going to allow to set over here. So I can make a vector 2. And I can do fade range, let's call it. And let's by default start it at 0 and end it at 1. And then we can put it here, we don't want alpha to go under 1 or under 0 or over 1. So we want to make sure to clamp it. And for that, we just use what we used earlier, which is saturate, which is basically just a clamp between 0 and 1. Let's move this because my spaghetti is starting to get a little big, and then we can just hook this up here. So you can use the values from here to kind of remap how you want. So basically if you want to move the fade up, you can just make this number smaller, and you can see the preview here and the preview here how basically the legs gotta start getting consumed. And also if you want to narrow, like right now it starts at 1 here and 0 here, so the fade is very soft all around. You can also bring this one down by basically pushing the number up. And why does the number go up to push down? Because we want 1 to be here, so we put 1.53 here. Does that make sense? So you're basically making this number larger so that the 1, which is the maximum of visibility that you're gonna get, comes down essentially. So now the fade is kind of from here to here. I hope that makes some sense as to why we're moving the numbers in and out. Okay, so the last thing I want to add is that right now this part is super opaque, so I'm just going to add like a little extra value so you can fade them out a little bit. So over here we add a little float and we just call it fade. And let's set that as a slider from 0 to 1. And we're just basically gonna use a multiply here from this value that we created down here into here and out. Thank you for the pets. And now, as you can see, he disappeared because our default value was 0. That's totally fine. We can just open the material and then we can use this fade to bring him in and out. So if you want to do some effect where, you know, he's appearing at random times or whatever, you can do that. And yeah, that's basically the core of the material. I think, I mean, I don't know, how close did we get? I think that's pretty close. Obviously, you know, the assets changed a few things, but we have sort of the darkness in the inside. We have the little Fresnel outline. We have the legs fading out. So, this is Pablo from the future. This is several hours after I recorded the stream. And when I was making a little demo, I wanted to make a demo that was like closer to The Sims. I realized I had screwed up majorly. So I made a big oversight. So let me show you the little demo so you can see the source of my pain. So here we are. This is what it looks like with some more Sims-like characters. And you know, it's okay, but you can see a big problem here. The arm can be seen through the body, but as you can see in the reference, you cannot see his arm through his body. Same here, you can see like over here you'd see a hand and it's not there. So that makes basically my version look way more dirty, like, you know, things like over here where you can see this extra geometry. Same over here where you can see her leg behind, well, her leg. Yeah, it is pretty bad. So my thinking on what they're doing is basically they're doing one draw pass with the bar or everything that's not a ghost. Then they're doing a second one where it is just the ghosts, and then they're combining it together. So I want to do a quick version of that so you can see how it works, but it is quite a bit more complicated. Okay, so here we go. This is the updated version. As you can see now, the arm doesn't draw on top anymore, and it looks much closer to what the other one was, but it is quite a bit more complicated to set up. So let me give you a quick rundown of how it works. So the shader I showed you before basically works exactly the same. The only difference is I changed it from being transparent to being opaque. And then I set up a new camera. This new camera only renders the ghosts into a render target. So you can see this is what that texture looks like. So it's basically just doing the ghosts. And then if I have another shader, which I made to just draw those ghosts, which is basically a very simple shader. Essentially all it's doing is grabbing the screen position, using that as the UV to check on that render texture that I made. And then I have a little slider for being able to fade in and out the whole thing. And then basically what I'm doing here is I'm adding the RGB and then dividing by 3, so getting like the average sort of luminosity of the color that's going in, and using that as also part of the alpha. So basically what that means is I'm turning anything that's black is now becoming invisible. Now if you remember, like the original one from The Sims did have a little bit of like darker spots inside, so I am losing that in this process. But basically it now renders first the whole thing. So again, that's what this looks like. And basically to preview this, I'm just disconnecting the alpha over here. So basically this is what the full rendering of that looks like. Then you can do this with a post process. In this case, I'm just doing the cheap version, which is just put a little quad in front of the camera. And then I'm just using basically that texture. I'm just drawing it on top. And that way I don't have the problem with the arm. So I'm just kind of combining those two things together. Now, there's still a little bit of an issue here, which is basically that right now I'm not combining the depths of the both scenes, right? So if I had a tree or something in front of him, he would still draw on top. So one more change that I made that I hadn't noticed before in the references, if you look at this one in particular, the one in the center, he's doing a little bit of a deformation of the seat and of the table over here. Curiously enough, she doesn't seem to be doing it. Like, you can see this tool is pretty much straight. Same with this one, same with this. So like I don't know, maybe this one started doing the bar? I don't see it. Honestly, it seems like only this guy does it. I don't know why, but seems like he's the only one that does. But anyways, I added it too, just in case, so you can see now in my thing here, now it does like a little deformation of whatever is behind it. So the way this works is basically in my settings, I have opaque texture on, and when you have that, you can actually use in Shader Graph a node called scene color, and that basically will tell you whatever is already drawn in the scene. So I'll grab my little quad. When I go to check scene color, it'll grab, you know, the bench or whatever. So all I have to do is, instead of grabbing from that position, I just move it a little bit so it looks kind of distorted. And to move it, I'm just using a little bit of noise, and that's about it. So that was a bit of a roller coaster. At first I thought, oh, I got this easy. Then later on I was like, oh no, wait, I don't got this. But later I was like, no, never mind, I do got this. Anyways, it was a little bumpy, but at least we got there in the end. I hope you learned something. I did, for sure. Hey, buddy. Okay, I'll feed you soon. Yeah, I'm trying to do a video here. It's always a lot of fun to just like look at something in a game and wonder, look how they did that, and just kind of try to reproduce it. There's a lot of fun there. Let me know how you think I did in this challenge. Did I nail it? Did I fail it? What did I do? Also, don't forget to like and subscribe and all that stuff if you enjoyed the video. I also stream on Twitch on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. This whole video was captured during a stream, so I hope to see you there sometime. And until the next one, I'll see you. Adios.
Well, thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out. Thanks for watching.